Metro Manila, bustling, sprawling Southeast Asian capital of the Philippines, home to somewhere between 12 to 20 million people, the world's most densely populated city.
Welcome to Friends of Anthony Bourdain, a podcast where we speak to the friends and colleagues of the late and great Anthony Bourdain. I'm one of your hosts, Fabrizio Villalpando, a food blogger, recipe developer, and ex-clumsy waiter.
And I'm Emily Fedner, your co-host. I am a cook, host, recipe developer, and I own a pasta pop-up here in New York. We are both huge Bourdainophiles, we like to say. And today we had the privilege of speaking to another fan and friend of Anthony Bourdain, Chef Margarita Forés.
She's one of the most, I think, pleasantly badass people, I think.
What a descriptor. Pleasantly
it's just,
badass.
Like, so lovely and positive, but also all the stuff. I mean, she was honored Asia's best female chef in 2016.
In 2016, she won Asia's best female chef, but I think that Chef Forés is most well known for her basically pioneering of Italian cuisine in the Philippines. She's had restaurants, I believe, since the late 80s, early 90s, starting with a catering company, but just different concepts focused on Italian food using Filipino ingredients and also championing Filipino regional ingredients and farmers and things like that. So she's been cooking for decades.
And the way that she describes her food, and from what we've seen, just so brilliantly and creatively and respectfully marrying two cultures, keeping the Italian essence as well as promoting and keeping the Filipino essence.
I could really learn from her.
Yeah. I think a lot of us could learn from her.
Absolutely.
Filipinos give of themselves, of their time, their money, their love to others. They do and continue to do what needs to be done to survive.
She had the pleasure of meeting Anthony Bourdain. I think she said it was in 2014.
Yeah. In his apartment in the Upper East Side.
Yeah. Her son was friends with Anthony Bourdain's au pair, who is Filipina. So they had the opportunity to actually physically go to his apartment on the Upper East Side and spend an afternoon together. And I can speak for both of us when I say we're freaking jealous.
Very jealous.
What an opportunity. And it's pretty rare that someone meets their, how they say, don't meet your heroes.
Well,
it's
Margarita,
rare if someone comes.
I think, tells us a story where that is not the case.
Yeah, she seems just as thrilled by him and his role in culture and his role in kind of uplifting Filipino food and Filipino people as she was before she met him. So that's really an incredible feat. So we had the best conversation with her about everything and geeked out about pasta because, as one does, we loved speaking with her.
Yeah. So here we have our lovely conversation with the incredible Margarita Forés.
Margarita, thank you so much for joining us today. We have a depth of things to cover, and you've had such an amazing, iconic career. So welcome.
No, it's my pleasure and my honor, actually. And thank you so much for having me.
We have a lot to talk about, but let's get right to the reason we're here together.
Yes.
How did you meet Anthony Bourdain, and what was that first meeting like?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it happened actually in 2014. So that's like 9 years ago. It's still kind of very vivid in my mind and in my heart because actually my son, Amado, who's an absolute foodie, just like me, was in touch with Anthony's au pair, who's Filipina. Her name is Myra Quizon, and she was the au pair of Anthony's daughter. My son is so kind of like resourceful, and he wanted to get his Anthony Bourdain book autographed. So he had been in touch with Myra, and he got her to have the book signed. But when he got out of college, actually in the end of July in 2014, he was able to kind of get Myra to arrange a meeting for us with Anthony, Amado, and me. Really kind of like, for me, it almost felt like I was meeting God, right? Especially because what Anthony stands for and what he represents for the industry that I'm in. And Myra was like very careful, and she said, please don't say how I was able to get this to happen, but we'll make it happen. And they got Amado and me to come up to Anthony's apartment on the Upper East Side. And it was a wonderful, like glorious summer day. It was the like 3 p.m. in the afternoon. My son and I, Amado and I, were like with goosebumps forever because we were like so excited. And as we were going on the elevator, I was like pinching myself to say, is this really happening? And finally, the apartment door opened and Anthony met us at the door. Both his wife and his daughter were there. And at the same time, actually, because Myra's son is the same age of Anthony's daughter, she actually became like the best friend. He became the best friend of Anthony's daughter. So he was always like a playmate. And I mean, just being in Anthony Bourdain's apartment, Amado and I were like, I mean, the two of us were like super, not just starstruck, but like feeling like, is this really happening to us, right? So we had this like long conversation about food, and Anthony was talking about his interest in Filipino food because I mean he had like a little bit of really past experience, tasting Filipino food. And I remember that in his living room, we were seated and he offered Amado and me bottles of San Pellegrino, and from a distance, I could see his like iconic duck press. He had this like antique duck press in the living room that was like a trophy. And I was like, oh my God, this is like, I can't believe his books were behind the couch where we were seated. And it was just like the most magical afternoon for Amado and me. We talked a lot about just, the restaurant industry and what I was doing in Manila with food. And at the same time, I mean, it was just like really just touching base and kindred spirits just getting together. And after about an hour and a half, I mean, I felt like sad that it was almost over, but the experience will always be like in Amado's and my heart. And after that, Marla and I kept in touch. And actually, when a few years after Anthony came to Manila for like a street food festival, he also filmed his show actually where he did the lechon with a friend of mine in Cebu. So Amado and I were like groupies. We didn't get a chance to see him in Manila, but we were like super like informed about where he was every moment of his days that he was in Manila. So it was really kind of like after that, I think that what's also very special for me is that Anthony was so super instrumental in getting Filipino food kind of like out there because it's always been a challenge for us in the Philippines. Being Asian, we always feel kind of like sad that all the other Asian cuisines have taken over, whether it's Thai, Vietnamese, or even Indonesian food or Malaysian food. And it's always been kind of like a real puzzle for us why Filipino food never really got out there. But after Anthony featured the lechon on his show, and I think it wasn't just the food actually that he featured on that show of his, he talked a lot about us Filipinos as people and as caregivers. And I think that a lot of this had to do with Myra's family being so much a part of Anthony's family through the years. And I think that it was so poignant to see that episode because being Filipina, I saw that it wasn't just about the sinigang and the sisig and the lechon and the adobo, but really, I think Anthony had a really soft spot for us as a people. It really helped the world discover more about us and our country. And I think that for me, if there's anything that I would feel most important about what Anthony gave to us as a country and as a people is really that he brought us out into the world and made people see what was unique about us and unique about our cuisine and about our culture. So all of us in the Philippines are like like super absolute fans up to this day. And ask any Filipino, Anthony Bourdain is like super top of mind for us.
Anthony Bourdain tragically passed away on June 8th, 2018. His death brought attention to the issue of mental health and highlighted the fact that mental health struggles can affect anyone, regardless of their public image or achievements.
Following Bourdain's passing, there's been an increased awareness and discussion surrounding mental health in the culinary and entertainment industries. Many celebrities and professionals have opened up about their own struggles, aiming to reduce the stigma associated with mental health issues.
It's so important to continue conversations about mental health awareness and provide support for those facing challenges.
That's why this episode is sponsored by Betterhelp. Betterhelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is so important because finding a therapist can be super hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area.
BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days.
It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. It's betterhelp.com/FOAB. There's a link in the podcast description. Get started today and enjoy 10% off your first month. Discount code FOAB will be automatically applied. Actually, BetterHelp was my first foray into therapy because I really wasn't sure how to get started, and I had experienced a really big life event. It was the first platform I turned to demystify therapy, make it easy, and also it was very affordable. So very exciting to be able to partner with BetterHelp and spread the therapy gospel. It's something that I know you and I, Fab, really believe in and talk about often.
Especially with resources like BetterHelp that makes it more accessible.
We do speak so often about mental health struggles in the restaurant industry. Making therapy affordable and accessible to line cooks and restaurant workers and people who might not have traditional health insurance is something that I feel so strongly about. So
highly recommend. Society will thank you. You will thank you. Your family and friends will thank you. Young men, please seek therapy. It's worked wonders for me.
It's betterhelp.com/FOAB. There's a link in the podcast description. Get started today and enjoy 10% off your first month. Discount code FOAB will be automatically applied.
It's really such a common thread with a lot of different cultures and people that we have the honor of speaking with. Anthony Bourdain didn't just highlight the delicious food, which is very important in any culture and a huge source of connection, but also the people behind the food in a way that was equally, if not more important than just something tasting delicious. So that's really amazing to hear. Did he cook anything for you in his apartment?
No, nothing. Actually, it was just San Pellegrino. But I think that he didn't really have to like entertain us and cook for us. I think that everybody knew that he was an absolute foodie, but just being, in the same room with him, I mean, that was like super special for us. And like you said earlier, I think every episode of Anthony's show was not so much just about the food. It was really about like life and the best part of life. Whether it was like positive stuff or not so positive stuff, it was really like the reality of human nature and the uniqueness of every place that he visited. And I think that's what made Anthony super special to the world, is that he was just so real. And I think that there's sometimes a lack of that in the world today. You see a lot of food shows, a lot of reality shows about food, but I think that everything that Anthony did was actually most touching because it wasn't contrived. It was always just so real and so in touch with reality. And I think that's what made it so special.
Like going to what you said about speaking not only about the food, but also the people and the people that make the food and where it comes from. I've spoken about this before. So my family's from Mexico. And I think one of the first things I ever saw was the Mexico episode of, I think, No Reservations. And to me,
Yes.
I think it's like the first 15, 20 minutes before you see the food. He just talks about what the Mexican people have done in the food industry. And you go in the back of many kitchens and it's hardworking Mexicans, and talks about the people. And like you said, both the good and the bad of what's going on in the country and the culture. Assuming that, that must have been so beautiful seeing, especially, in the Philippines, that many people they should know more
Right.
about the food, but unfortunately they don't. And I think that's what was so special about Tony and his show was, you could see a food show where you see the dishes and everything. You might not know what it could possibly taste like, but then with his show and his way with words, you see like the culture, like the sense of humor in the people, even, some of the more darker or sad parts of the country. But all together, the way that he wrapped it up, I thought was just poetic and beautiful. It makes you want to be like, where is the best Filipino spot in my town? And I need to taste what this food tastes like. And also, I
No,
think I can speak for Emily that we are very jealous, and it's such a pleasure hearing you talk about this intimate encounter with Tony. It's amazing.
Yes, hugely jealous. And yeah, it wasn't a food show. It was always more than a food show. It was a show where there was food, but it was a show about culture and people and humanity, which we love. But we all also love food, and I think all three of us can really connect about that. Your food is really special and unique. So, will you tell us a little bit more about your culinary journey and your food?
actually, my journey with food started with learning about Italian food, which is really strange. I always say to myself, why is it that I started to like cook pasta before I even got into making our own adobo or lechon or sinigang. And it happened for me as a teenager when I moved to New York in the 70s. My family was there in political exile, and in the 70s, actually, it was a real like time of Italianization in New York, right? A lot of
Yes.
young Italians had moved to New York during that time because things weren't great in Italy. So they were opening like really super interesting Italian restaurants, but not your typical like Chianti bottles from the ceiling and red and white checkered tablecloths on the table, right? Not Southern Italian style or not like American Italian style, but Northern Italian like pizzerias with thin crusts or restaurants with cream based pasta and risotto. And that's kind of like what I fell in love with. So I was working actually with Valentino at that time. I was a gopher at the Valentino office. So I fell in love with the culture and the Italians I was working with. So I would try to like cook at home at nights, and eventually I would like invite them over and see if I could like make pasta for them. And eventually it just became something that I felt got me in the gut. Although I was working in fashion, but it was more like cooking at night and setting the table that really made me happy. My family was living in New York at that time, and in 1985, unfortunately, my grandfather passed away. My family was always part of the opposition, politically in the Philippines. And when my grandfather passed away in 1985, we all went home to Manila. And in 6 months, the revolution in the Philippines happened where President Marcos was overthrown. I think that maybe it was providential that I had to go home because life in Manila is a bit slow. After everything politically settled down, I was like, oh my God, I miss the buzz in New York. And I still have this like desire to want to know if I want to continue cooking Italian food. So that's when I decided in September of 1986 actually to go to Italy. I found an Italian signora who was teaching in her home just out of her apartment in Florence. And I mean, I think when I got to Italy, I almost I felt like a homing pigeon. It just felt so right. And I guess the rest is history because it was just 4 months that I was in Florence, but I felt like a sponge. I absorbed everything. And when I went back home for Christmas in December, I started to cook in Manila, tried to cook Italian food for people. That was in 1986, 87. And that's what started me working with food. And then eventually I started to cook in people's homes, just small dinners. And then eventually the dinners got bigger. It took me about 10 years doing private catering for Italian food to open a restaurant, my own restaurant in 1997. But I think what was more important was that I think that the biggest lesson I learned from Italy is really their soft power, their respect for ingredients, and how Italian culture is so kind of like, and the cuisine is also kind of like so homegrown. So it also forced me actually to be very inquisitive again and search about our own cuisine in the Philippines. The biggest challenge for me was finding good tomatoes in the Philippines to do Italian food. And our tomatoes are sour here back home. We use tomatoes to sour dishes because our tomatoes are so acidic. So that whole challenge of working with our own ingredients and seeing how I could do Italian food with them, that made me super discover more about our own cuisine and our own ingredients.
I love the concept of applying the ingredients around you to creating a different culture's food. You know, I think that's every challenge for every immigrant. Like my parents are from Ukraine, and my
Oh,
mom will make borscht, but she'll use really random American vegetables in the borscht, but it's still borscht, but you're just tasked with creating the dishes you love and recreating a culture you love, but with what's in front of you. So that's a really cool part of how you cook Italian food. It's Italian food,
yes.
but with Filipino ingredients. So what would you say is a dish that represents that marriage the best for you?
Well, I'll tell you, apart from from like working with the tomatoes to make them sweet, I think discovering that we Filipinos also have squash flowers. I love squash flowers in Italy, right? They stuff them with mozzarella and anchovies, etc. And here, we Filipinos, we're short people as well. So our squash flowers are tiny compared to the ones in Italy. But when I found out that we had them here as well, I mean, I think that that was one of my like biggest eurekas to be able to try to do what Italians do with squash flowers, but using our Filipino squash flowers. Aside from that, I think also discovering our beautiful palm hearts here. I remember a restaurant in Florence that was doing a beautiful salad just with shaved palm hearts and beautiful Parmigiano slivered. And I asked them, where did the palm hearts come from? And the chef at the restaurant came to me with a can, and the palmitos, the palm hearts, were from Puerto Rico and canned. So I said, oh my God, when I get back to the Philippines, I'm definitely going to use our beautiful palm hearts, shave them, use them super fresh with the Parmigiano from Italy. So a lot of those things, you know, when you apply it in the country where you're at, it also allows you to be a bit more creative. And aside from that, you get a lot of eurekas as well and realize that the world is so small that you may be able to find things that are similar and be able to work with them as well.
I feel like it's such a beautiful way also to revolutionize cuisine and even slip into delicious little accidents and create something new.
Yes.
So I'm curious. So at the time when you're doing these dinners, making Italian food, what was the sort of like? How did it get received in the Philippines at the time? And like, was Italian food popular? Like, were there many restaurants at the time where you could eat Italian food?
Well, in the 80s, the Italian food that we had in Manila was much like American Italian food. The
Mhm.
restaurants were always rustic. The way I explained earlier with the Chianti bottles in the ceiling, everything almost like totally like red sauce based, more like really the southern Italian cuisine that was brought to America. When I tried to do different things and do fresh pasta and do pastas with cream sauce, and I think that it kind of like made people more interested also, and
Mhm.
they felt that there was this like new way of discovering Italian food. It was also a way for me to be purist about it. When I opened my restaurant in 1997, it was a simple Italian cafe concept. I did it in like shopping malls in Manila. And Filipinos were always used to sweet bolognese sauce, right?
Mhm.
That's like the Filipino taste profile. And then
Like
we
the
never
Jollibee
really had
spaghetti?
Like this spaghetti.
exactly
Yeah,
Jollibee
yeah.
spaghetti, exactly.
So good,
And
by
we
the way.
didn't have
So good.
pasta that was al dente. So when I opened the restaurant, I said, no, I need to be purist about this, because we had clients that would send the pasta back and say, but this is like so raw. Like the pasta is not cooked. I said, no, that's al dente. So I needed to like kind of like put my foot down. And I think that
Hmm.
in hindsight, 26 years after, I'm super grateful that I did kind of like be strict about it, because then it forced people to really appreciate like real Italian food at that time.
Hmm.
And what's nice is that the brand Chibo, which is the first one that I started, is now 26 years old, and people still look to it as like probably the pioneer in bringing like really authentic Italian, modern Italian food to Manila.
I mean, somebody has got to do it. And I think that every cuisine that is introduced to people of a country or of a different culture kind of goes through this same evolution. You know, you think about New
Yes,
York and you think about Chinese food, for instance, you see Americanized Chinese food, and it's taken, you know, decades for regionalized Chinese food to become popular. And people are like,
exactly.
no, I want Sichuan food. I want Hunan food, you know, and the same thing happens with Italian food. The same thing happened with Italian food
Regionality,
here in New
right?
York, as I'm sure happened in the Philippines, where you know, we started with a bunch of Southern Italian and Sicilian immigrants, red sauce joints. But, you know, for instance, my business partner at my pasta pop-up, her family is from Genoa and Venice. My business partner is Sarah Raffetto, and her family owns Raffetto's Fresh Pasta in Greenwich
Oh,
Village.
okay.
I don't know if you've heard of it. It's been around
No,
for a
I've
long
heard
time.
of rapetos, of course.
Oh, amazing. So Sarah Raffetto is my business partner. And it's interesting because a lot of the items that they sell at Raffetto's were probably not popular at the time. There's like there's, you know, mushroom pesto, lots of pestos, lots of, you know, creamy things, and just different items that were not necessarily popular at the time. But somebody's got to do it, and somebody's got to introduce those things and kind of explain that, hey, Italian food is not just Italian food, and Filipino food is not
Exactly.
just Filipino food. There's a lot more to it.
I think that regionality actually is one of the things that's super similar with Italian food and Filipino food. You know, we're both like the Italian boot is the same length as the Philippine archipelago. And that's why I feel that learning everything about Italian food will never happen for me the same way learning everything about Filipino food will also be a challenge, because like I said earlier, every little town, the food changes, the ingredients change. And what I love about it is that it's always like a journey. It's always like a super quest for finding something new. And I think that that will always happen for me with Italy and with my own country. And I think that maybe that's what Tony was trying to do as well, right? I mean, he he really visited like a lot of like big famous places, but he also visited nondescript places that were like super interesting as well. And I think that that's the thing that people loved about him. It inspires us who also want to know so much more about cuisine and about culture. We always want to be like him, you know, as we live our lives in the quest for finding new food and just finding new things about life and what makes life interesting.
Yeah, he really became the blueprint for anyone who was interested in exploring culture through cuisine, and just learning from him and how he did it, and highlighting the tiny regions, as like he can go to Rome, but he'll also go to some fishing village off the coast and love
Exactly.
them both.
It's interesting too, like even more specific than regions too, just how he would go into people's real locals homes and then just see, like, you know, even within a region or within a town, it's so interesting too how the same dish could be interpreted so differently within, like, in my case, la abuelita or the nona or whatever figure in the house is the one that's cooking, and the way that he would highlight that within each country, culture, region, and even individual home
Yeah,
was
you get
so.
it's actually intimidating. We were saying this right before you got here, how it's so exciting, the prospect of, you know, there's so much to learn and there's so
Mhm.
much to eat and try, that, but it, you know, it shifts on such a granular level, literally home to home, that none of us will ever, and it's a source of excitement and adventure, but also for me, such a source of anxiety that I will never try everything. And it's stressful, but amazing. I just wanted to ask you what your number one favorite pasta dish is, since we're all pasta lovers here.
Mm.
Oh gosh. I actually love long noodles. I have a very like favorite, like super special Filipino ingredient, which is like baby crab fat. So
Mm.
my favorite pasta would be to make a really nice al dente linguine using the baby crab fat from the Philippines, squeezing a little bit of our Philippine lime, the calamansi on it. I love long noodles, and I love the most simple ones that have only like one or two ingredients in them. And I think that being able to do a long pasta, a spaghettini or a linguine, like super perfect is the biggest challenge. A lot of the fresh pastas or even like tubular ones you can mask and make it taste great. But I think long noodles are the biggest challenge. And so I would like, for me, my most favorite pasta would be any long noodle with the baby crab fat from my country. And I wish that Anthony was still around and Tony was still around. I would love to give him like a case of the baby crab fat because I think that he would love it. And every time I travel, actually, whether it's to cook or just to travel around, and I know that I'm going to see chefs, I always have maybe like a dozen bottles in my suitcase so that I can share the ingredient with the chefs and they can use it and use it with rice or use it with pasta. So when I see you guys in New York, I'll bring you some
I
for
was just
sure.
about to say, can I put in an order?
Yes.
You'll make a
Like pasta with something fishy is the most iconic combination. But wait,
Right?
I wanted to talk about your crab and water spinach ravioli dish
Yes. Yeah.
because it was with the baby
Actually,
crab fat.
yes, it's the same crab fat. And actually the spinach ravioli that I did was one of the first things that I created when I came back from Italy. And it was really inspired by visiting Venice and trying one of those seafood ravioli dishes. And in my head, I already knew, I said, oh my goodness, when I get home, I'm going to get our beautiful crab, put it into the ravioli, put a beautiful lemon cream sauce, but using our Filipino calamansi, and then drizzle the crab fat on it. So I think that to this day, that probably would be the most iconic creation that I've done. I still do it. I serve it in one of my restaurants and use it a lot for my catering events. A lot of the tasting dinners that I do, I
Freezing
think
a
that
little bit.
it's
Can
a
you hear us?
wonderful marriage. Yeah, I'll make it for you when I go to New York. It's wonderful because I think that it marries being able to use the most beautiful Filipino ingredients and do it using it for an Italian dish without compromising the Italianness or the Filipino-ness of the dish and the ingredients. It's a wonderful marriage of the two cultures and representing the best of both.
I love that so much. And I feel like pasta is such an incredible medium for a lot of different cultural expressions. And I always joke at my pasta pop up that Sarah's Nana might be rolling around in her grave, but we do a lot of similar things. One of our signature dishes is a sweet corn and chive raviolo alla uovo with miso, brown butter, incorporating all sorts of different cultures and ingredients not necessarily native to Italian cooking. When I read about your crab and water spinach ravioli, I was like, that's so interesting. That's kind of exactly something that I try to accomplish at my pasta pop-up.
Right?
So it's very cool that you were able to do that in such an iconic and perfect way, honoring both cultures.
because I feel like it does take a good sense of responsibility, and like you said, where it's like you don't take away the Italian essence, and you don't take away the Filipino essence,
Exactly.
and that marriage just has to work so perfectly. And I feel like the way that you've done it is just so masterfully done, and yeah, I feel like it takes a lot of. It's also very courageous because the Italians love the.
I was about to say, Margarita, you have a backbone because
you went against.
messing with the Italians. As someone who has done the same, it's not easy.
I know how purist they are, right?
I was on Instagram literally yesterday, and I follow this. I can't remember the page. I wish I could mention their name, but it's very like filmed in in Italy. The captions are in Italian. The chefs are like Michelin star Italian chefs. Not a single lick of English in the whole page.
Well, they're like, my Nana does it differently. Everyone gets very protective.
Like they fight amongst each other.
Everyone gets super protective. That's why I almost think you're better off doing a raviolo with miso brown butter than you are claiming that this is a cacio e pepe or a carbonara, because then people will come for you. It is better to just completely go off book and do something different than it is to claim the authenticity of something. So I always say whenever we introduce people to the pasta pop-up, we say, we are, proudly ourselves, and we are not authentic.
That takes so much creativity.
It really does. But you've opened several restaurants and concepts. So can you tell us a little bit more about Grace Park? Because I feel like that was a really interesting and unique venture after Chibo.
Yeah, actually, Grace Park is my farm to table concept. It's named after an area here in Manila where my father's family had a home. Apart from it being the name of the place, what I love about it is that the word grace took on a different meaning because the entire restaurant was built with recycled things, old wood, old chairs from my family's old Pizza Hut restaurants, because my family has the franchise for Pizza Hut in the Philippines.
Amazing.
I can't believe we're just now mentioning this. This is important.
Big fan. I live in New York City. And I order pizza.
With the crust. I'm from Ohio, so I don't even have to pretend to be cool when it comes to pizza. I have Pizza Hut, Papa John's. Anyway, sorry we cut you off. Please keep going.
So all the cutlery is unmatched, the plates are unmatched. Everything is recycled so that it could represent like sustainability and using like thrown objects, etc., to make a place beautiful. And what it is we kind of the word grace takes on a different meaning because then grace comes from the fact that we help the Filipino farmer and the Filipino artisan by highlighting the ingredients that come from them. The range of the dishes we make meatballs, but we use Filipino grass-fed meat for the meatballs. And then we do dishes from my home province as well. Very kind of like local regional dishes from my home province. And yet we also have steaks, but serve them with sides that are, Filipino vegetables, etc. And I think what I love about it is that it's a 10-year-old restaurant and it's still around. And I think that we were kind of like pioneers in doing a farm to table concept. And up to this day, I think that the Philippines is actually lucky that we didn't industrialize farming so quickly, because then we're so behind in the way that we grow our vegetables and our produce that we're actually way ahead because we're still doing things in a very old fashioned way. So I think that that's the concept that we want to highlight at Grace Park.
I love that concept. We are so behind that we're actually ahead because that's what we're seeing all the time in America. We went through this crazy industrialized period and sort of like blundered our food supply, and now everyone's like wanting to purchase things from farms upstate.
And it's interesting because we were talking to Jacques Pepin, and he mentioned, he's like, I don't even know what the word organic was but when he was a kid, pesticides didn't even exist.
It just was. And I'm really into the wine world and was studying to my WSET, and I was talking about natural wines, and people are like, I don't really like natural wine. And I'm just like, do you realize that all wine was natural wine until it wasn't? Like, it actually was supposed to be natural. I'm not referring to like funky kombucha. I'm referring to like the method of producing wine has just changed so much. And there was just that period of time where everything kind of became
I love how you phrase that though. That's really special.
I love that. And Grace Park earned an award.
People took notice actually of Grace Park because of the fact that we were the first actually farm to table place.
It's so incredible. And I think it really took your original concept of marrying Filipino ingredients with, utilizing them in different dishes to the next level by really becoming so specific with the farms and the way you're sourcing those ingredients.
Yes.
So it feels like a really cool next step after. But these days you have a show, The Crawl on Metro Channel.
You guys really look things up.
You're a fascinating person. Yeah. We couldn't stop.
I did The Crawl first in Italy. And then we did one in New York. I don't know if you were able to see it on YouTube. And very recently, I did one in Hong Kong. So it's a Manila show, and they have other hosts actually that do other cities. But I just feel like really blessed that I was able to do it in New York. It was really hard to get into like the best restaurants. We had like a locator in New York who was trying to get us to film in certain places, but she was never successful. But what we ended up doing was doing it like the guerrilla way. And it was so great because places like Balthazar, I mean, we just said, can we just have a table? And they said, sure, you can. Just promise not to film our clients. If you want to film, just make sure that you just film yourselves. So they were like really nice about it. Places like Pies and Thighs in New York, we also just kind of like knocked on the door and asked if we could film. And I think that the owner kind of like Googled me. And when she found out it was me, she said, oh, of course, come in. And
She's like,
it
anything
was
you want.
exactly most of the places that we ended up shooting were the best ones were the ones that were unplanned. So
Um,
even the Filipino restaurants were also like really nice to shoot.
in one or two sentences, can you summarize the premise of the crawl?
Well, the crawl is really like discovering a city by doing like a food crawl in like very distinct places that can showcase the food scene in a place. For us in New York, though, it was for me so much more important because since I grew up there, I made sure that, we could do like Cat's Deli and Russ and Daughters and really the more iconic places. And apart from that, we were able to shoot, ourselves in Central Park. And my grandparents actually have a bench dedicated to them in the park. We featured that as well. So apart from just the food in the city, I think that we were able to share the vibe of the city with our viewers, the places that we covered, and also the choice of the restaurants. Including places like the Hot Nathan's and all the other, the real things that make New York, New York, right? Apart from the tasting restaurants and then making sure that New York's more iconic, like street food places were also featured.
Speaking of a challenge, being able to summarize a city in a food crawl is so difficult. I don't know if you know this. Actually, you have no reason to know this, but a big thing that I do is cuisine specific food crawls on Instagram. So I actually did a Filipino food crawl with Chef Leah
You
Cohen,
did?
who I texted last night, and she said she knows you.
Yes,
I was
she's
talking.
been to Manila as well.
She took me on a Filipino food crawl in Queens. We had all the things. It was so incredible. And I was actually texting with her. We're supposed to meet up again soon. And I remember talking to her about Filipino food and how it's underrepresented in favor of Thai food and Vietnamese food. And I feel like this is a challenge amongst many people who really pioneer Filipino food. But while we're talking about Filipino people, something I love about the Filipino community, similarly to the Italian community, Mexican, like there's such a strong sense of pride. And so I knew when we were going to interview you, I was like, I'm going to text Leah and I'm going to text Chef Jordan Andino. They will absolutely know you and be so excited. And I was correct. There's such a sense of Filipino pride.
Also for Mexico though, there's so much of a real fraternity between Mexico and us because although we were ruled by Spain for 333 years, we were ruled via Mexico. The Governor General of Mexico was the one who was in charge of the Philippines. If you look at our names are the same as yours. Every town has a plaza with a church, and you will feel at home when you come here.
I grew up Catholic, and every year my church, because there was a high Latino and Filipino communities that would go to this church. Every year in the summer, there was a like tri-cultural barbecue. So it was like a lot of white Americans, burgers and hot dogs. And then it would be like the Latinos and Filipinos rolling up. They got like sound systems going. They have like these huge tins of like food, and I remember just eating like all of the different dishes, and the Latinos and the Filipinos, those dishes were gone. Everyone was like, what is this? This is incredible. I just remember, but I think I need to have more of a Filipino food experience out here in New York.
We're going to go. There's a few restaurants definitely in Elmhurst and in the Queens area. There's so much cool food culture in Queens. We could just dedicate a day to a Queens food crawl
No,
and
definitely.
eat
They say that
so well.
The Filipino cuisine there is like super authentic. The area where actually the broker that ships everything from the States to us in Manila is right there in Queens. It's called Johnny Cargo. That's the only way we can get stuff from America to Manila really quickly.
Oh,
And
that's amazing.
I know that like that whole street where they are is where all the Filipino like barbecue places are. And I'm so like really excited to kind of experiment and walk through that area and discover and really like see what they're doing with Filipino food there.
We are absolutely going to have to do that. I think I ate like 5 lumpia or more. I just couldn't stop. It's one of my favorite things.
I should tell you a story about my days there in the 70s because my mother was like part of this circle that would do like Studio 54 almost every night, right? And of course, we being the younger generation, we were never assured to get in unless we were with her. But on the nights that we weren't with her, we would bring lumpia and pancit to the doorman. And the minute that they saw that we brought the food, they would let us in. So that's
Oh
how
my
we
God,
got
the best
into
bargaining
Studio
chip.
54.
I mean, how could you not let someone in who's bringing you
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
food? That would be ridiculous. Behind you is this incredible collection of pepper grinders. And before we got online, we were chatting about this, but can you please tell us about your pepper grinder collection and a very recent special edition?
Yes. Well, actually, my peppermint collection is already like up to like 370 pieces. So I don't buy like normal looking ones anymore because I need to make sure that they're like super unique. So the ones that you see in the back this is probably just a third of what I have. The rest is like on the other side of the shelf. But the most special, newest addition to my collection actually are Tony's peppermills.
Oh
These
wow.
are these were given to me by his daughter's au pair, Myra, and they're actually Mario Batali's his designed peppermills, but they came from Tony's kitchen. And
Wow.
Myra came to Manila about 6 months ago, and she told me that I have something to add to your collection, and I think that you're going to cherish this totally because then this is like my probably my most treasured two pepper mills in my collection because they're from him and I can just imagine the dishes that he created using the pepper from here. These two will always be in my heart. So I thank Myra for sharing this with me. When I finally build my restaurant to showcase the pepper mills, I promise these will be in a glass case for sure.
Oh,
I would have burst out crying immediately.
No, I
that's so
cried when Myra gave it to me because
Would
Mario
you
is
not?
also a good friend. I think that, this coming from Tony's kitchen is just like super priceless. It'll be forever, forever cherished. I
That's
would
such
have wanted to
a
have his duck breast, but I think
There's
it went in auction. So
yeah, that thing is probably worth a lot. But aside from the physical legacy that he's left on you with the pepper mills, what would you say would be the most lasting impact Anthony Bourdain had on you? You know, something of his or something he taught you that you carry with you to this day and for the future.
well, I think that not just for me, but for me and my son Amado, I think that he inspired us to love what we do with food so much more. And he also taught us to not just appreciate the food part, but to also like love the culture and the people that create the food, regardless of where we enjoy it and where we appreciate it. And I think that also really truly just his zest for life. I think that he taught us to just never stop, to just keep going, taking every opportunity that we can to make the most of things and really just be sponges and take the chance every time the opportunity comes to travel and appreciate really not just what you eat but what you learn from being where you are. And apart from that, I think it's also us realize that because we are in this industry, to be able to be creative, doing such a basic function, you create food and food is what makes people exist and live. I think that that's what he taught us, that to be able to do that creatively and to be such an important part of imparting such a basic function in life with others. I think that's really the biggest lesson that Tony's taught us, and it's a lesson that we carry with us forever.
That's amazing.
And I just wanted to say, I could tell that Tony must have loved you. I mean, you're like creative and brilliant and very conscious of, like you were talking about, like your restaurants, how you want to support like the local farmers and making sure that, you have like the local artisans and have stuff in your restaurants. And I know clearly like you stand for what he believed in, and that's amazing. I'm glad that he brought us all here together.
I know. Every day we get to experience his legacy by meeting people and connecting with people who clearly at least had one thing in common, which is our love and respect for a person who has impacted so many. So thank you so much.
I'm so thankful that you allowed me to do this with you. And I just want to say that we'll miss him. We miss him so much. And we have him in our hearts, and he makes us make our work so much more meaningful because of what he's taught us.
Yeah.
Rather than kind of like focusing on the sadness of losing him, I think that maybe a few days after the loss, it was kind of like more important to just remember all the good things that he gave to us and what he brought to us through the years of his work. Up to this day, I choose not to remember the day that he left, because then his presence is still so big. So, I mean, when you watch any of his shows, it's almost like he's still around.
That's a really beautiful sentiment. And I know it's shared by many, many people that we speak to, at least. So thank you so much for spending your evening with us. It's 11 p.m. in Manila. I don't know how you're awake. I would be passing out.
And I'm so thankful. So I promise we'll see each other face to face.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Friends of Anthony Bourdain.
You can listen along wherever you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe, rate, review. Let us know if there's someone you're dying for us to interview on the pod. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all the social media platforms at Friends of Anthony Bourdain.